there was a woman who was a friend, and she was in the last stages of cancer, and she'd come for what was probably her last week at Mahia and swam every day, and this day Moko was there, but he was away with about 40-50 people down the beach, and she went in by herself, and he suddenly raced over and he stayed with her for about 5 minutes and just circled her and smoothed against her and let her stroke him, you know, and it was so special, and he just didn't want anybody else. But the way he went to her, you know, by herself, there were lots of dotted people around and heaps of people to play with and gear, but no, he knew she needed something. She died, she was hospitalised. She lasted about 6 months after that. But he pinched the oars of one of the two children in a kayak, and he pinched one of these oars, and off he went with it, and then he mimicked how you use a kayak by putting it in his mouth and going from side to side, making the oar look as though he was kayaking along. And then when they wanted it back, they couldn't get it back, and so two adults went out in their big kayaks and they thought they'd corner him, and they mucked around. He wouldn't give it, and they couldn't corner him, so they threw a red ball in. So he said it was more or less like, oh, this is good, my favourite thing. So he took the red ball, pushed it along with his nose and balanced, still kept the oar as well balanced on the top of his nose, so he was very, very multi-dexterous. And it took them 2 hours to get an oar back. But he things that vanished, it was amazing. He must have stored them somewhere. He was playing with two young fellas, probably about 12 or 13-year-olds, and they were in their wetsuits, and he liked people in wetsuits. He must have realised that they could stay in longer, and so they were playing with them, and there was a bit of surf running, and then he came in and he flipped something at them, and they sort of looked at it, but then they wanted to play boogie boarding with him, so he went off after them and left this floating in the sea, and a woman standing near me said, "What's that?" And I said, "It's probably a fish." And she said, "A fish?" And I said, "Yes, he often gives fish to people." And so she shot in with her clothes on, shot into the water, got wet through, grabbed the fish, came back laughing and said, "Oh, I'm going to have that for dinner." And off she went. I always liked that one. I saw that one. Yeah, that was funny. Yeah. Dad, who took his son out for a fishing trip, and he had his friends staying there, 2 little boys, and he said, "Well, it's your fishing trip." And so they were fishing, and Moko came along, and they said, "Dad, can we feed it our bait?" And he said, "Well, it's your fishing trip, what you want to." And so they dropped a pilchard over the side, and the dolphin dived down after it, but came back up again with a gurnard for them, as most say, "Don't want a dead fish, here, have one of these good ones." Not a little egg. So it was very interesting that any time anyone went in the water, and it was usually men with a little one perched on their shoulder so that they were up out of the way but could get a good view, and Moko always went for them. He went and he'd go round them and through their legs, in and out, through their legs, nearly knocking them over. And it was almost as if his sonar gave him that image, but it wasn't a normal image. It was obviously 2. So, so they have great sonar. So they must know there's 2 heartbeats, there's 2 sets of legs, there's 2 different shapes there, but why are they together like that? And it was almost like he was trying to work it out by going through underneath them to work out how this was happening, that you had 2 people, one up and one down. I used to often sit with friends having a gin in the evening and watching Moko. There's a buoy for the channel where the boats launch, and Moko used to thrash it. He'd be over it, under it, round it. He just loved it. So if there were no people around, the buoy got thrashed and he'd try and trash it. And we'd watch him, and then this friend used to say he ought to be in marine land for his own protection, and we used to have this big argue every time about he ought to go to marine land to protect him and to protect us. And I'd say, you can't put such a wonderful creature in a little pond when he's used to a whole big ocean. But he was right in a way. He probably would have lasted long, but would he have been as happy? He would have had lots of people, I suppose. Who knows? It's a fairly big buoy, and it's anchored out there to keep the boats in the channel, because it's there's some very shallow water there. And when he was lonely, or when he wanted attention, he'd go out there and thrash it, and he'd just leap over the top of it, then leap back over again, and then he'd leap up and go whack onto it, and then he'd push it and shove it, and you'd see this yellow buoy, and it'd be dancing the water. You'd say, oh, Moko's here, you know, and then he'd leap out, and you'd say, he's definitely here, you know, and there'd be splash and crash, and you know, and the poor old, it was like having a punching bag, I think. Yeah. So I reckon we ought to have always had one of those buoys with a bell on it, so that he'd come in and ring the bell. And when he used to come in, and people would go to get their boat in, and they'd have the tractor, and I just loved that, and he'd come round the boat, and he'd get between the boat and the tractor, and they'd have to stop, and then he'd go round the tractor tyres, and he'd half beach himself, you know, and then he'd wriggle himself back in, and he was a menace in many ways, and he'd pinch things, and then he learned to break boogie boards, that if you leapt up in the air and you went crash onto them, he could break them, you know. And I've seen many a kid throw a tantrum because, my board, that fish broke my board. And Mum would say, yeah, but think of it when you're older, you know, you'll be able to say, I swam with the dolphin and the dolphin broke my boogie board. It'll be the story for your life. And it broke my boogie board. I can get you a new boogie board. I can't get you a new dolphin. Oh, it was quite funny when he pinched things and that, yeah. And he just adored people. He really did. That was his life. And I think in winter time he used to cruise up and down. An amazing number of people that went in with him in the winter. And I always remember the first time I was there, and I kept on, I'd seen him lots of times, but I hadn't gone in the water with him. And I suddenly thought this day, why on earth aren't I in the water with him? And I thought, oh, by the time I go and put my togs on, he'll be gone, you know. And I had this mentality, I know, for about a week. And then I thought, who cares? You've got the opportunity of a lifetime. You climb in with your clothes on, so I did. And after that, I used to have people be standing watching, and I used to, if there were a big crowd, I'd stand back and just watch what he did. And I'd say to them, and they'd say, oh, I wish I'd bought my togs. And I say, how many times are you going to swim with a real live dolphin that wants to be with people, a wild mammal that's come to meet people? How many times is that going to happen in your life? Get in with your clothes on. And they did. And they said, why didn't I do that before? And it was, you just go in, you know. If you haven't got to change clothes, I'll take you home and I'll put them in the dryer for you. Go and have the opportunity, you know. And so particularly, you know, these lovely young people that were doing the overseas tour and that, and you know, one girl, she said, no, I don't think I want to get in. And that was her friend who was already in there. And I said, come on, don't be a girl. And I said, give me a camera, go. And she got in, and she said, oh, why didn't I could have had more time. You know, so yeah, it was lovely. But he was just such a wonderful, friendly dolphin. And we do miss him heaps. A once in a lifetime, isn't it? Experience, when you think about it. Had to get to old age to do it. I have swum with the dolphins at Marineland before the last one died, so I have had swum with dolphins, but they stay aloof from you. They just watch you. They circle by and sort of watch you, and you're allowed to feed them and you pay to swim with them. But this, you know, I want to be with you, you know, a wild creature. That was the most amazing thing. Yeah. You know, he was here for so long, and everybody loved him, and he was just marvellous. And the number of interesting people that came to see him, and the way they played with him. And then we still, I think most of us, even still now, you sort of have a look out and think, oh no, there's no little black head coming in and to see us again. So it was pretty sad losing him like that. We thought we ought to send someone to go and get him back, but never happened. So they are free animals.